Ireland's Sinn Féin party throws weight behind calls to award the 2021 Nobel Prize to Cuba's Henry Reeve Medical Brigades. Ecuadorians say country's democracy is under attack. And hundreds of Peruvian health workers down tools over conditions of service. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the South. Ireland's Sinn Féin party has nominated Cuba's Henry Reeve Medical Brigades for the Nobel Peace Prize. On their official Twitter account, the Irish Republican Party called Cuba's humanitarian work and solidarity a beacon of light. Founded by the late Cuban leader Fidel Castro in 2005, the humanitarian brigades are made up of over 7,000 health professionals who have treated over 3.5 million people across 21 countries. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, the brigades have been providing aid at the front lines in some of the worst affected nations, such as Italy and South Africa. People in Ecuador took to the streets of Quito on Tuesday to demand that the Supreme Electoral Court respect people's rights to elect their own leaders. The mobilizations come as electoral authorities have threatened to remove left-wing candidates Andrés Arauz and Aruz-Rabascall from the ballot, which guarantees people's right to elect their leaders no matter their political affiliation.
Bueno, aquí estamos enviando un mensaje a todo el planeta.
We want to send a message to the entire world. We're under alert in Ecuador because our democracy is being threatened. Those in power want to ignore all laws and rules without just case. They want to remove progressive forces from the ballot. We have already been excluded from participating the past few years, and now that we're leading in the polls, they want to remove us entirely. We need to regain our country. We have to start making decisions in defense of our country and not for the benefit of a small group of people who have been detrimental to the rest of us.
The former leaders of Colombia's FARC armed group have demanded the resignation of President Ivan Duque, saying he is leading a government stained with blood, drug trafficking and electoral fraud. Iván Márquez, who served as chief negotiator for the FARC during peace talks with the Colombian government in 2016, condemned the systematic extermination of ex-combatants. The number of guerrillas or ex-guerrillas assassinated in Colombia since the signing of the peace agreements currently stand at 230. In Brazil, Sao Paulo, civilian police executed search warrants at the State Health Ministry and the City Council as part of an investigation into misuse of public funds. So far, the courts have issued a total of 260 search and seizure warrants and 57 temporary arrest warrants in the state of Sao Paulo. Warrants are also being carried out in the states of Paraná, Minas Gerais, and Mato Grosso do Sul. More than 9,000 medical workers in Peru have staged a 48-hour walkout. The protesting professionals work for Salud, the country's national social security provider. They are demanding increased salaries and medical supplies. According to the Ombudsman's office, there are more than 4,000 health workers who work without any risk insurance. They also do not have the right to any sick leave in case they are diagnosed with COVID-19. A total of 166 doctors have died from the novel coronavirus in Peru.
We ask for dignity for the medical profession, and we are calling for the attention of our patients that everything we are doing now is so that there exists a better quality of service to improve the quality of medical care. Any sacrifice the doctors make on the streets will translate into better quality of care. We are not asking for a rise in pay. What we are asking for is what is already demanded for by law, which is what our duty is and our job.
We are here demanding no more deaths. We, as a result of the pandemic.
Meanwhile, the government of Peru has been sued at the United Nations for the forced sterilization of thousands of women during the administration of Alberto Fujimori from 1996 to 2001. This is the first time a complaint has been filed before the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women to demand full reparations for victims and their families. Alberto Fujimori is serving a 25-year prison sentence for the death and kidnapping of dozens of people during his administration.
More than 15 years have passed.
Latin America's largest solar power plant officially started operations over the weekend. The Cachari Solar Park will provide 300 megawatts of electricity for over 20 years. The stations, built by China's Power Construction and the Shanghai Electric Power Company, is located in Argentina's Jujuy province. The governor of Jujuy, Gerardo Morales, said via Twitter that by opening the park, the province has become a generator of clean energy for all Argentina. On the occasion of a high-level meeting on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in the era of COVID-19 and beyond, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro highlighted the importance of international solidarity and demanded an end to economic blockades.
International solidarity is particularly important right now. This is why we urge you to put the human life at the center of everything, above any other interest. We advocate that amongst other actions, we should focus on the vulnerabilities pertaining to the debt by developing countries, and that financial and technological assistance, global assistance, is increased in order to achieve a sustainable, fair, and inclusive model of development. In the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela suggests setting up a fund for public procurement to ensure access to food products and healthcare products that is fueled by public funding. The current situation requires it. It will make it possible to deal with the current inequalities and unequal access. We also demand an end to the financial, economic, and other embargo and blockade against countries that only worsens the situation and further undermines the right to development. We urgently need to discuss the possibility of a forum for development financing for countries that are affected by unilateral coercive measures. This should be much more than simply a slogan of 2030 development agenda.
Speaking of blockades, the Venezuelan government has presented an anti-blockade law at the National Constituent Assembly. According to President Nicolas Maduro, the law seeks to help the nation overcome coercive and unilateral sanctions that have battered the economy. The document has been presented to ANC President Diosdado Cabello for further debate and eventual approval. The law, in essence, hopes to revert the effects of the interventionist sanctions and revitalize the nation's economy. Now, economic sanctions have become the norm for the U.S. government to exert pressure over the Venezuelan people. Now, with looming parliamentary elections, opposition leaders have also become the target of sanctions.
The U.S. Treasury Department has sanctioned opposition leaders who are set to take part in December's legislative elections.
Sanctions stopped being used just to put pressure on the government and are now being used as blackmail against those of us that have opposed extremist leaders. For 21 years, they sunk us into violent and endless confrontations.
Among those recently sanctioned are Bernabé Gutiérrez and Miguel Ponente, who broke away from extremist sectors led by Juan Guaidó. The both agreed they no longer supported violence and coup attempts to end the Bolivarian revolution.
We have seen how violence and weapons led us nowhere. This roadmap was set up by that man who called himself president. He's only president on Twitter. Everything he has done only led to disappointments.
Meanwhile, the U.S. and certain members of the opposition continue to claim sanctions only affect authorities.
These so-called leaders have been in charge of sanctioning not only individuals but the entire nation.
If sanctions only targeted individuals, the adverse effects would not be so big. But most of the sanctions affect the country as a whole and have only worsened our crisis. We want the crisis to end, so we have chosen change. The only way forward is via elections and respect for the Constitution.
The Bolivarian government has long denounced that sanctions affect public services and the purchase of basic goods.
We want to make a call for an end to the economic blockade. This only worsens poverty and hurts those most vulnerable.
Even the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has called for an end to sanctions, especially since the start of the global pandemic.
In other news, the leader of the Lebanese resistance movement, Hezbollah, has denied allegations that the group is storing missiles in a Beirut residential area. His comments came hours after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused Hezbollah of keeping weapons next to a Beirut gas station.
If there are rockets there at the moment as I speak, it is 8:43 p.m. local time. I think if Hezbollah had tens of rockets or even one single rocket, they won't make it in time, within 30 minutes, as I am speaking about it, to move them away. We do not store rockets, not in Beirut port, not next to a gas station, and we know where we should store our rockets.
The United States is seeking to increase its military and political influence in northeast Syria, and for that purpose, it is reinforcing its illegal military bases in the region with the troops it has withdrawn from Iraq, while promoting the separatist plans of the Kurdish militias of the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces. Our correspondent Hisham Wanous brings us the details.
U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, James Referee, recently met with Kurdish militias in areas under their control in northeast Syria. During the meeting, he demanded that they unite their ranks under a single command and stop the sale of oil and wheat to the Syrian government. Through this step, Washington intends to activate the so-called Caesar Act, stop Russian attempts to relaunch the dialogue between Damascus and Kurdish forces, and boost its divisive plans against the Arab nation, according to experts.
The U.S. strategy is based on the use of local force that serve its interests and confront the popular force contrary to its colonialist plans. And in our case, the so-called Syrian Democratic Force constitute the instrument that the United States used to strike against national unity, territorial integrity, and the national economy. And unfortunately, this force acts in an unpatriotic manner in the service of the plans of U.S. imperialists, which fulfill this unpatriotic role.
At the same time, Washington reinforces its illegal military bases on Syrian soil with the installation of new radars, the increase of its escort and reconnaissance flights, the shipment of Bradley-type combat vehicles, and the introduction from neighboring Iraq of troops and trucks loaded with weapons, ammunition, and war material. Meanwhile, U.S. tankers are moving stolen Syrian oil in the opposite direction.
The northeastern region of Al Jazeera, Syria, is occupied by the terrorist organization of the so-called Democratic Syrian Force that commit terrorist acts against the civilian population and loot Syrian oil. And they do it with the support of invading troops of the United States, which are currently reinforcing their illegal military bases at the service of their interests, and in a way that evidences the falseness of President Trump's declaration last year about his intention to withdraw his troops from our country.
In response, the Syrian Arab Army and its Russian ally have reinforced their military positions in the northeastern province of Al-Hasaka and adjacent cities. In turn, popular resistance against U.S. troops and their Kurdish mercenaries has intensified. The Syrian government and citizens describe the U.S. forces as occupiers and ratify their determination to continue the struggle until they are expelled from Syrian soil.
6 months since the coronavirus pandemic upended the global airline industry, Ethiopian Airlines is facing a heavy toll, more than $1 billion in lost revenue and 850 infected employees. Yet Tewolde Jibri Miriam, CEO of the state-owned airline and jewel of Ethiopia's economy, maintains the situation would have been far worse if it had not adopted new strategies to make up for the 90% drop in passenger traffic. The company has managed to stay afloat by developing its air freight business. In March, it converted 45 passenger jets into cargo planes in order to meet the surging demand for air freight. This has helped it to avoid seeking a bailout from the government or laying off employees.
That we were very quick, very fast, flexible and agile to move our forces, resources and everything to cargo. The pandemic has caught us or has caught African airlines in different stages. Some African airlines were doing very well when the pandemic came. Other African airlines were not doing well even before the pandemic. So you can imagine the impact. So some of us will survive. Some of us may not survive. Some of us may need state aid if it is available. Some of us may need to restructure, maybe shrink and...
The United Nations has urged South Sudan's warring parties to speed up the peace process to pave way for the implementation of the 2018 peace agreement. The head of the UN mission in South Sudan, David Shira, said there has been no progress, especially on reforming and training the armed forces, who are expected to take charge during the 3-year transitional period. Shira also called on political leaders to build transparency and accountability systems to cushion the country's economy.
COVID-19 has slowed down the peace process, but the pandemic is not entirely to blame. The peace process and the peace agreement is limping along, and it needs to move much faster. My concern about the delay is that it risks pushing elections out well beyond the timeline of the agreement. This will add to the growing disillusionment amongst communities about whether the political will exists to give South Sudanese citizens the opportunity to choose their leaders.
Armenia and Azerbaijan have reported more casualties in Nagorno-Karabakh clashes as the worst spate of fighting since the 1990s raged for a third day in the region. Armenian officials have confirmed the deaths of 3 more civilians, while Azerbaijan said civilian casualties on its side reached 10 on Tuesday. This brings the total confirmed deaths in the fighting to 99, including 84 separatist fighters and 15 civilians. Observers of the conflict have urged the international community to ramp up efforts aimed at finding a political solution. Greek authorities have completed the transfer of hundreds of refugees from the island of Lesbos and others to the mainland in order to reduce chronic overcrowding that caused hardship and fanned tensions with locals. According to the Migration Ministry, more than 2,500 migrants have been relocated since Monday afternoon. Over 12,000 asylum seekers were left homeless on September 8th after a fire ravaged the Lesbos camp of Moira, Europe's largest. Germany will impose a limit on the number of people at parties and family gatherings in areas worst affected by the novel coronavirus. Any region where infection rates reach 35 per 100,000 people would be required to impose a cap of 50 maximum. And if rates shoot up to 50 per 100,000 people, then only 25 people would be allowed at public gatherings. New infection numbers in Germany stand currently at around 2,000 a day, a trend that, according to experts, could leap to 19,200 daily by Christmas if it continues at the current rate.
We want to act regionally, specifically and precisely, and not, so to speak, close the whole country again. This must be avoided at all costs. We now have a large number of risk areas in the European area, and I believe that holidays in these risk areas are not appropriate. One can still travel in Germany as well.
Hundreds of workers have protested in silence outside the UK Parliament to ask the government to extend the furlough scheme for freelance workers and allow live events to restart. With different measures in each UK nation, localized lockdowns and a rapidly changing national picture, many Britons say they are confused about coronavirus restrictions. With 42,000 deaths, the highest toll in Europe, ministers are desperate to stop the virus from spreading as it did in the spring. But the new rules have left many people angry or at least puzzled.
Everyone is in the same situation, that we are not allowed to work, And while we're not allowed to work, all of the freelancers are in a really bad situation. And the frustration is that we're an industry that is often doing events for other people, doing events for charity, and now we are here asking for support and investment.
If we don't extend, or the government don't extend the furlough period, we won't be able to keep our team on. We have to make them redundant. So it's made it a very difficult situation for a business that's been operating for 20 years very successfully. And we just desperately need the support.
And now let's take a look at some more news from around the world.
Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Ahmad Al Sabah has become the oil-rich nation's new ruler after his brother died on Tuesday at the age of 91. While the rise of the Crown Prince came as prescribed by Kuwait's constitution, there will likely be negotiations about who will become the next Crown Prince. The 80-year-old new emir previously served as the country's defense minister. France has announced plans to gradually ban mink farms as well as the use of wild animals in traveling circuses and dolphins and orcas in theme parks. The government said it would offer circuses and dolphinariums an aid package up to $9.3 million to help them adopt to the bans. More than 20 European countries have either banned or heavily restricted the use of animals for entertainment.
We are going to have a measure that will aim to gradually end traveling circuses with animals. Obviously, we are not at all about the end of circuses. On the contrary, circuses are part of our heritage, and we wish to accompany circus artists to reinvent their profession and to continue to amaze young and old alike in the communes.
A mayor in southern Romania has been re-elected with a landslide victory, despite having died from COVID-19 days before the election. Local media reported that Ion Alemani won 1,057 out of the 1,600 votes cast in Devesulu municipality, even though he died on September 17. Officials say ballots had already been printed at the time of Alemani's death, and his name could not be removed. After the polls closed, local supporters flocked to his grave to celebrate the victory. A rerun of the election is expected.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.